is the one that changed the dependent variable. Let me give you another example. Many of us have cooked before, okay? Like this afternoon, and before this lecture came up, you wanted to take a brunch. So you have been preparing your rice, you've been cooking it, and or you've been making some stew. So as stew is on the fire, you take a little piece of it to put on your palm to taste whether the salt is okay or not okay, whether you need to add one Maggi or not to add one Maggi to that stew you are making. So that means the taste that you get is a function, is dependent on whether you are adding Maggi or not adding enough Maggi. So the Maggi and the salt you are adding, they are the independent variables. The dependent variable is the taste that you obtain when you put the stew on your palm and you lick it to find out whether it's okay or not okay. But again, there's something we call extraneous variable. Extraneous variable is anything in psychology research or experiment other than the IV or DV. They can present challenges and introduce errors. So it is important for researchers to control these extraneous factors. For example, we have said that Ronaldo and Lionel Messi and maybe Lewandowski, they are very, very great footballers on earth. They may play better than many other players out there in the world. But let's say Barcelona and Juventus and whichever club Lewandowski is playing for, they have put themselves into a team and they want to come and play our own Super Eagles in Nigeria. Okay? On a normal day, you will have thought that those people will defeat Nigeria, isn't it? But an extraneous variable could hinder them from performing. It's not that they have not trained. It's not they are not in good psychological mood. So if you are playing them at the peak of winter over there, you bring them to Nigeria around February, early March, where the sun is so touchy, or maybe you take them to Maiduguri to go and play. Apart from the sun that is biting their skin, they will not be able to play very well. The fear of Boko Haram again will not make them to concentrate on the pitch. So Nigeria may defeat even the best team that may be brought from Europe. Why? Because there's an extraneous variable that's affecting what they will do, okay, or the level of performance. So which methods do we adopt when we want to collect data? They include the following: observation methods, case studies, surveys, interviews. So I'm going to explain each of these methods a little more. So let's look at observation. Don't forget I've talked about 4 methods here of collecting data. I talked about observation. You can be observing people and be collecting information about them. It's case studies. You pick a specific case and you start investigating it. That's also a method. You can also be conducting a survey. In other words, you cannot survey all adolescents in Nigeria, but you can have a sample, a representation, a microcosm of adolescents in Nigeria to be able to know the opinions of almost every other adolescent in Nigeria, because you have chosen to investigate or to survey a good representative percentage of the population of adolescents in Nigeria. And of course, interviews also. For you to, in those days before we will admit everyone into UI to study any course, we will not only do a post-UTME, we also conduct interviews. In psychology department, we did that a lot. What we are doing is to see whether this person will do well when it comes in, and when it becomes too competitive. By interviewing you, we are looking at many variables around you. Your composure, your calmness, whether you even appear responsible. Somebody will be coming for interview and he has long nails like a chicken or an eagle, and he's coming to read psychology. We are not likely going to give such a person admission. Why? Because this person does not know that it's not good for him to be wearing chicken-like or hawk-like nails. When you are not a hawk, why do you wear that? So by the time we are interviewing, we can even be asking, why are you wearing a long nail at the interview venue? And if the person is not able to justify, if you are saying your pastor or your imam has asked you to use it, maybe we'll believe you a little bit. But if you say, well, I just feel like doing it, you do on your own. So now let's quickly look at some of these techniques a little more closely. So when we talk about observational studies, what do we mean? allow researchers to document behavior in a natural setting and to also witness events that could not be produced or observed in a laboratory. Okay, so the technique by which you can get answers to such problems will be by conducting an observation, by watching. So this differs from most other forms of data collection in that the researcher does not manipulate variables. In other words, you don't change the independent variable. You don't manipulate the variable, or you don't direct the question to participants directly, but you are, maybe by proxy or from a distance. Some people will say from the window, you are checking what's happening in the room. Those types of observation. So advantages include observing natural behavior. In other words, you can see those people because they are not seeing you. You're looking at them from a distance. Okay, it's like you are taking your baby to a daycare center. So many times you are not too sure how does this baby behave when he gets to the daycare center. So you can, when you are coming to pick the baby in the afternoon after the day, you just stop by somewhere around the door or the window and be watching the behavior of the baby as he interacts with other children or other baby at the daycare. So by observing, you can say, so it's because I'm around. That's why this baby just cries anyhow. If I'm not there, she will settle down and sort herself out. So you have observed to be able to have that information. Advantages include natural behavior. In other words, that person presents his true self without him knowing that somebody is watching. And of course, you can do that to be able to refine your hypothesis, and you can allow observation of that behavior so that you can study that behavior within its natural environment. So, but the disadvantages are that these studies do not produce quantitative data. In other words, you can, like we are checking blood pressure now, we can see maybe it is 120/80, or we are checking pulse rate. We can see your pulse rate is maybe 72 beats per minute, or we are talking about cycle of respiration. We are talking respiration. We can quantifiably see that you have 20 cycles per minute, which is the normal. Okay, but in terms of observation, how do you quantify? How do you rate a behavior as good or bad? Upon what are you going to rate behavior that you are observing from a distance? So many times, it doesn't also allow for cause and effect treatment. And of course, doing this may be so time consuming and can put the researcher to bias. Bias in the sense that, you may not be able to speak objectively because the manner by which you are rating that person that you are observing may not be the way someone else will rate that same person within that context. Okay? And it may be difficult to generalize to real world situation. That you are seeing this within that setting doesn't mean that that behavior that you are seeing will be repeatable in other parts of the world or in other settings. So, but when we're talking about observation, there are two types of observation. One, there's something we call participant observation, and there's something also we call non-participant observation. So when we say participant observation, what do we mean? It's also known as ethnographic research. And that is when a researcher actually becomes a part of a group that they are studying in order to collect data and understand a social phenomenon or problem. You can remember, I don't know whether you heard this story about 30 years ago. There was a woman who came out the way, explained whether Germany or Sweden to Nigeria to study Osun River Osun in Osun State, Osun Osogbo, okay? And wanted to be part of the rituals that they are doing and to find out whether truly that Osun goddess, whether it gives people children. So, how to leave all the way from Germany with the husband to come over to Nigeria to be studying that Osun River and Osun goddess. But what we are seeing is here, she had to come all the way from Germany to live at the Osun Shrine for many years. And of course, you remember the story. While they were getting old, the husband left back for home. The woman herself said she cannot leave Osun Shrine anymore. In fact, she died in Osun Shrine. And I don't know whether she was buried there or she was carried back to her home country. So, because she wanted to be a participant observer of the way by which Osun goddess, is worshipped and whether Osun goddess actually gives people children or answer prayers. It's characterized by efforts of an investigator to gain entrance into and social acceptance by an alien group. Like this example I was citing is a German But at a point in time, she was a custodian of Oshogbo River. She became a goddess there. That was, and of course, there's a video also going around whereby someone was studying Yoruba in such a way that she could sing in Yoruba so fluently, better than even some Yorubas. So these are issues that will make us to know that when you're doing participant observation, chances are that the culture of that group that you are naturally alien to could overshadow you and you could become like them. There's a saying in Yoruba that that is, if a lead stays with a soap for too long, that lead may become, something like that soap itself. So, but when we are talking about participant observation, it could also be overt and covert. At a point in time, I explained what we mean by overt and covert when we're talking about overt behavior, covert behavior. Overt involves the researcher being open with the group who they are studying. So you tell them, I'm come to study your environment, your society, your certain attributes in your community. Okay? It tells them, and they are aware. Societies are aware they are being researched because the one researching them has informed them that he is studying them. But there's something we call non-participant observation. Okay? Especially this method is used by detectives. They want to pretend as if they are also Yahoo boys. Or when they want to track people that are smoking weed. Okay? If they go in police uniform and they go like an askari and say, all of them will run away. They will not be able to study them. But they will pretend as if they are member of that gang who take in their aim. They dress like them. They will put their face cap. They will put it to the back. They will wear ear strands that are like fingers. Those who don't use comb, and they maybe even paint their lips like some of those guys that also take weed. They will pretend as if they are also a natural weed smoker. So they are taking that behavior. They want to be in that group to see like how many rounds do they smoke in a day? What are the things they do? When someone doesn't have money and wants to smoke Indian hemp, would there be people willing to give him money to buy? When they begin to study that behavior, they are, they are participant observer. But the non-participant observer, you stop, you stand at the gap and you study the person you want to, investigate. So non-participant observation, you observe individuals and groups without getting involved in the life of that group. But in participant observation, you be like them, you pretend as if you are like them. So in non-participant observation, you observe the research subjects without participating, without them knowing that they are being observed at all. And is to understand the phenomenon by entering the community or social system involved, while staying separate from the activities being observed in that group. Is of course the most common method of observational studies because it has the least influence on the subjects that, and thereby people will not know that they are being studied or that an investigator that's in their midst. So we want to talk about case studies. Case studies is another way by which we study population, we study behaviors, we gather data. So this involves an up-close, in-depth, analysis of a specific behavior, which may also juxtapose into detailed examination of a particular case or cases. Like why COVID-19 came. Nobody knew about COVID-19. Well, we couldn't say so much about COVID-19. But the one case that we saw in China, that was what the WHO and many parts of the world started analyzing. What was peculiar about this case we saw in Wuhan, China? And so they started, so that's a case study. And it's based on in-depth investigation of a single individual. And look at the Italian that came to Nigeria from Italy, came to Lagos and came to Ogun State. So that was an index case. They now have to quarantine that person to be using him to study what are the signs and symptoms that we see in a COVID patient this time last year. Okay, so that's the case study. It could include personal interviews, archival records, psychometric tests, etc. When you say psychometric tests, tests developed by psychologists to be able to measure a specific variable. What are the advantages? They can provide a rich source of qualitative information, and they often present an opportunity to research rare disorders or situations otherwise unethical to study, and they may also offer some insight on how to conduct future research in that same area. So because we're able to study that Italian that came to Nigeria, that opened the space up for people to now begin to research into COVID-19 in Nigeria. So I want to talk about another method. And that method is what we call survey.